coming, and when we leave, I'll try to remember to say this again, but remember you're in kind of close quarters as far as parking goes, so please be very careful and patient as you pull out. I'm always worried about everybody's safety. So, well, tonight, I'm on. In the parking lot, and I'll say it again, don't you people have anything better to do tonight? Isn't there some political speech going on that you want to hear? What I have prepared is, I don't think anything particularly new. It's just the story of Samuel Clemens' courtship and eventual arrival in Elmira and some of the things that transpired while he was here. Some of you may know the story better than I do, having grown up in the area. Several years ago, I was asked to put this presentation together. I had to go out to the University of California, Berkeley, to give a speech to Twainiacs, who had never been to Elmira. So the idea was to try and create something that would give them an understanding of what happened in Elmira. So we'll see what you think of it. There's an awful lot of photographs of the house itself. And like I said, some background information that I think you're already familiar with. I love this description written by Samuel Clemens in 1876. The study was given to him in 1874, so it's a couple of years after he's kind of gotten his groove of writing in the study and loves coming to Elmira. And he says it's the quietest of all quiet places. I think that we did not do that this evening. We got a little noisy, but... Alright, so that photograph, of course, is the birth home of Samuel Langhorne Clemens in Florida, Missouri. He was born in 1835. I just had to do some quick math there. In a very humble place. An awful lot of our great American leaders, however, in that century started out in pretty humble buildings. And that building is now located in a larger building to protect it. It's called the Shrine, Mark Twain Boyhood Shrine in Florida, Missouri. So the fact that they call it a shrine is, of course, very interesting, but I won't go there. That house is where Samuel Clemens grew up. So he was born in the other, more humble home, and then his family moved to Hannibal, Missouri. And I think that that's maybe a location that many of us have in our minds. Connected to Samuel Clemens. It actually is a really quite beautiful little home. I was just there this summer at a conference and had the privilege of walking through all the rooms, and you know, it was kind of nice to be in this building, you know, where the young Samuel Clemens grew up and saw the white town drowsing out the window and had a view of the Mississippi River. Here's our earliest photograph of Samuel Clemens. Pretty fine, huh? He's 15 years old. That thing on his head is not his hairdo. That's an apprentice printer's cap. So by age 15, he's already started working in his brother's print shop. His father has died. He needs to get some employment and some money to help his family, and there he is at age 15. I think even in that photograph, you can kind of see his bright eyes. He always said his eyes were piercing and blue. So, outside that print shop, though, is the mighty Mississippi River and the riverboats. And you know, as a 15-year-old young man growing up into his early 20s is pretty intrigued by those boats. Certainly, they would take him out of Hannibal to different places. And as you will probably well know, he does become a steamboat pilot on the Mississippi River before the Civil War. He loves that life. It's a pretty grand thing to be a steamboat pilot. I think we could maybe compare today to being a fighter pilot. You know, it's really a kind of a glamorous, macho career, and you meet a lot of people, and you get to know that river quite intimately. And of course, he loved the river. He loved the life. He learned the river very well. And there, of course, at the front of the riverboats was the lead man, and his task was to throw the weighted rope into the water, the lead weight on the end, you see that there. And if the river was about 6 feet deep, that would be 1 fathom deep. So the cry would be, by the mark, Ike, and that meant dangerous water. 1 fathom deep, 6 feet deep, you better slow that boat down, right? But if the cry was by the Mark Twain, you were 12 feet deep or 2 fathoms deep, so you were marking Twain, and that meant safe passage or safe water. And of course, that's one of the reasons he chose that for his pen name. In Life on the Mississippi, Life on the Mississippi, he says, there was no cry more welcome to the sound of the pilot than the cry of Mark Twain, because it meant safe water. But it also meant you had to be very watchful, because at any moment it could go back to Mark Ike, and you might have to slow that riverboat down. Of course, the Civil War comes along. We all know that. And with its arrival comes the ceasing of all riverboats on the Mississippi River, other than those that will support the Civil War. Sorry, I had to take a drink. So Clemens has to find something else to do. This job that he loves evaporates. And his older brother has been assigned to be undersecretary in one of the territories of the United States in the West. And he convinces his younger brother to go along. So off they go on stagecoach and sometimes on foot to the uncharted territories of the West and end up in Nevada. He participates in the Silver Rush, the Gold Rush, and he starts to do some writing with some measure of seriousness at that point in his life. He has written a little bit during his adolescence, but now he gets a job at the Territorial Enterprise in Nevada, and he starts writing. By 1863, he uses his pen name for the first time, Mark Twain. Now we've got a boat there on the screen. That's 1867. Civil War is over. A writer named Mark Twain has published a story you may have heard of, The Jumping Frog of Calaveras County. And he's got a bit of a name developing for himself. And he's now back in New York City. He leaves that Wild West life and ends up in Manhattan. And he is a reporter for a newspaper in Manhattan. And sees an advertisement for this boat, which turns out to be the first cruise ship. Not the most comfortable looking boat, I guess, but it was a novelty. And Samuel Clemens loved to travel. You know, he traveled to the West, he traveled to Hawaii, and now he sees an opportunity to travel to Europe on this first inaugural cruise ship. So he convinces his editor to get him a ticket, and off he goes. And this is a photograph of the folks who were on the Quaker City steamer, and they're dressed out in their best cruise attire. And, I do have a pointer. I didn't know I had one. Back over here, some Mark Twain scholars think that Mr. Samuel Clemens is seated. Off he goes. There's the Quaker City steamer in slightly calmer waters, so maybe you would want to be on that cruise ship after all. And the tenders are coming to greet the boat. And of course, while he's on that boat, he makes the critical intersection with a young man from Elmira, New York. And there he is, Mr. Charlie Langdon. Name rings a bell in your mind, I'm sure, if you're from Elmira. He grew up in Elmira, and he's the son of one of Elmira's wealthiest families back in that day. And his parents had similarly sent him off on the Quaker City steamer, kind of like a junior year abroad trip. They're hoping to educate him, civilize him a little bit, all of that stuff. But you can tell by this photograph that he joins up with Mr. Samuel Clemens, who is 32. Charlie's 17 in this photograph. They get their picture taken to commemorate their friendship on this Quaker City steamer. And, you know, Charlie writes home and tells his parents that he's eating dinner at the table where Mark Twain sits. Because at Mark Twain's table, people are always laughing. Well, Charlie invites Sam into his stateroom while the Quaker City steamer is docked off the Bay of Smyrna and shows him a little oval miniature picture of his older sister, who is back home in Elmira, New York. Some scholars think perhaps that is the photograph. Others suggest that one. No matter what, it was a pretty small photo. And Clemens takes a look at it. It's not a long moment of time in his life, but it leaves a very deep impression on him. Of course, back in Elmira, eventually Samuel Clemens meets Olivia Langdon and comes to Elmira to court that face that he first saw in that oval miniature frame. This is Olivia's mother. Her name is also Olivia Langdon, Olivia Lewis Langdon. And this is Olivia's father, Jervis Langdon, who, as we said, was a mighty fine man, wealthy man. With his wealth, he helped fund Elmira College, Coles Hall, in fact, which some of you may now notice is under reconstruction, right? Mr. Langdon helped construct with his considerable wealth. He believed in education for women. He also helped construct the Park Church in Elmira. He believed in its really progressive philosophies, its abolitionist stance. He believed loudly in equal rights for women and for people of all color and race. Really fine man. Another view of the Park Church as we see it today. And the Langdon Mansion. That was the beautiful home that Samuel Clemens, who, remember, was born in a very humble house in Florida, Missouri, comes courting Olivia Langdon. And the fence right there, you might recognize, because the fence still goes around Elmira College, at least most noticeably along College Avenue, Park Place. Of course, that beautiful home was torn down in the 1930s by city vote, so we no longer have it standing. We have a little plaque now commemorating where it was, but the plaque is wrong because it says that in memory of Mark Twain, Samuel L. Clemens, and his wife, Olivia Langdon, whose home was on the site. So you can't believe everything you read in a historical marker. That was the home of Olivia's mother and father, right? And of course we now have some businesses across the street from the Park Church. However, the house was still there. Those are some of the interior rooms of the house. So once again, you've got to reflect on Samuel Clemens' journey, from that very humble life, and then his kind of rough life in the West, and then his beginning career as an author, and then suddenly he's standing in these fine rooms of the Langdon Mansion in Elmira, New York, hoping to win the hand of a woman he has fallen very deeply in love with, Olivia Langdon. That's a photograph the year they were married. She's 24 years old in that photo, and Clemens was 34 when they married, so 10 years apart. Another interior shot of the Langdon Mansion. And of course, convincing the father and the mother that he is a worthy suitor of their daughter is kind of a fun story. There's Mr. Langdon, and there's Samuel Clemens in the year that he's proposing marriage to Olivia. Again, you can see those kind of amazingly bright eyes. And Mr. Langdon, a street businessman, asked Samuel Clemens to provide letters of recommendation or reference as to why he should allow this young man from the West to marry his daughter. And so the letters come in. You're a very good audience. Mr. Langdon's not sure what he thinks of all of that. And neither is Mr. Samuel Clemens. He asked his friends to give Mr. Langdon letters of recommendation, but I don't think he ever quite anticipated the humor. And this last one is written by Charles Clergyman Stebbins, and it says, Clemens is a humbug, shallow and superficial, a man whose life promised little and has accomplished less. A humbug, sir, a humbug. And Clemens was counting on this recommendation from Clergyman Stebbins. He figured a man of the cloth would likely speak well of him, but no, even he. So there's Mr. Langdon with a bit of a conundrum in his mind what to do. So here's his response. What kind of people are these? Haven't you a friend in the world? And then this really telling statement, I'll be your friend myself. That's how Clemens tells the story of the courtship and the conference with the father, and then finally he says, take the girl. I know you better than they do. And privately, Clemens sends this letter to his friend, J.H. Sound the loud timbrel. This is November 28, 1868. Notice, oops, sorry about that. He labels it private. So it's still kind of a confidential letter at this point. But he says, ring out the bells, sound the loud timbrel, and let yourselves out to your most prodigious capacity. For lo, I have fought the good fight, and lo, I have won. Sorry. Refused 3 times. Warned to quit once, accepted at last, and beloved. So he actually asked her 3 times, and finally makes his way in. As an amazing wedding present, Mr. and Mrs. Langdon surprise Samuel Clemens with this gift of a home, fully paid for, furnished with servants in Buffalo, New York. Clemens has a job there as an assistant editor at the Buffalo Express, and he arrives in front of this house on a snowy night in February, having just married Olivia 2 days before. He's got an address in hand. He's arranged to rent this apartment, he thinks, sight unseen. Of course, it's all been kind of set up through one of Mr. Langdon's business associates. And so in the dark and snowy night, they arrive in front of this house. He and Olivia, they've taken a sleigh ride from the train in Buffalo to this address, and Clemens says to Olivia, this can't be where we're living. I can't afford this. And she very quietly kind of encourages him to go ring the bell, and discovers that the person who opens the door is his father-in-law, followed by his mother-in-law, and behind that, about 40 people who had attended the wedding reception here in Elmira. And Clemens is fairly overwhelmed with it, and makes it kind of a funny comment to his father-in-law that you can come visit us here anytime you want. Don't have to give us any warning. Kind of a happy riot ensued, he said. Starts out pretty wonderful, right? But a series of quite unfortunate events follows that happy, almost blissful start, really. Sam discovers that he's not particularly happy as an editor. And he has published 1 book by the time he marries Olivia, The Innocents Abroad, which is the story of the Quaker City steamer trip. And his publisher is after him to get another one done. And this business of being an editor just isn't working well. Olivia is pregnant, and they're very joyful about that, of course, but she is mighty sick. So, with the best of intentions, a young woman named Emma Nye, who is Olivia's girlhood friend from right here in Elmira, stops by to help Olivia with all her sicknesses and discomfort from the pregnancy. And Emma comes down with typhoid and dies in Olivia's bed. And then the little baby is born, and he's premature and quite sickly right from the start. So, yeah, they're at the top of things, and then they make a steady decline. And that's a statue made of little Langdon, who, of course, doesn't live very long. But he certainly was a beloved and very cute little person. And as you may guess, Olivia comes down with typhoid next. And probably worst of all, to some measure, Jervis Langdon, this kind of wonderful father-in-law, comes down with stomach cancer here in Elmira, and he dies within months. And that is a great sorrow. And of course, he's buried in Elmira in the Langdon-Clemens plot in the Woodlawn Cemetery. 61 years old, so. And Clemens writes this really kind of telling letter, I think, to his publisher in the midst of all of this. He calls him Friend Bliss. He says, out of this chaos of my household, I snatch a moment to reply. We are packing up tonight, and tomorrow I shall take my wife to Elmira on a mattress for she can neither sit up nor stand, and will not for a week or 2. You do not know what it is to be in a state of absolute frenzy, desperation. I had rather die twice over than repeat the last 6 months of my life. Now do you see, I want rest. I want to get clear away from all hamperings, all harassments. I'm going to shut myself up in a farmhouse alone, on top an Elmira hill, and write. On my book. I will see no company and worry about nothing. Do you know that for 7 weeks I have not had my natural rest, but have been a night and day sick nurse to my wife, and am still, and shall continue to be for 2 or 3 weeks longer. And then he adds, I believe if that baby goes on crying 3 more hours this way, I will butt my frantic brains out and try to get some peace. Yours in perfect distraction. I'm sure a lot of new fathers can relate, and mothers. So there he is. That's an illustration again of him at that approximate time in his life, trying to figure things out, figure his future out. And there's this little boy, Langdon, who continues to be sick, very sickly, in fact, as the months roll by. And so he does pack up life in Buffalo, New York, just as he says. They sell that house, that wedding gift house. They pack up all the furnishings and ship them to Hartford, Connecticut, where his publisher is, and where he and Olivia vision they will build a home someday. They let the servants go, and they return here to Elmira to a very sad mother and mother-in-law, Olivia Lewis Langdon. And while all of that's going on, and the courtship is occurring, and the marriage, I need to swing back a little bit and tell you a little bit about this place where we are tonight. How did it come into their family? So we drop back a little bit to tell you that Mr. and Mrs. Langdon's oldest child, Susan, so that's Olivia's older sister, later Mrs. Theodore Crane, while still a little girl, was her father's frequent companion on the drives in which he found refreshment and diversion. So they'd hook up the horse and buggy and take some rides around the hills of Elmira together. Susan, there she is, and her father. Like him, she loved the high places. And we are in a high place tonight, I'm sure you know. And it was to her great joy that he decided to buy a plain little wooden house that they often passed on the crest of East Hill. And that's the man Susan eventually marries, Theodore Crane. So Quarry Farm comes into the family in that manner. I've lost the illustration of the house there, I apologize. Jervis Langdon, prior to his death, had purchased a property called Quarry Farm on East Hill in Elmira, New York, from farmer and merchant John Henry Fosnot on May 14, 1869, for that amount of money. And it was a fairly simple, basically one-floor dwelling, you know. Not as anywhere near as grand as the building that you see today. It evolved over time. It was meant to be a summer getaway from that hot city of Elmira. And that's Mr. Fosnot's tombstone, which our caretaker, Tim Morgan, did some research on and found in the Woodlawn Cemetery. So Quarry Farm back in the day was a simpler home. And I've got, I believe, if my memory is correct, several photographs here, early photographs of Quarry Farm. And you can still see the stone wall that you drive by on a regular basis. At this point in time, we've already got the back end on here, which is the caretaker's home. That was put on in 1898. And you can see the peaks and the chimneys, although some of the chimney in the kitchen was taken down many years ago. But it is a nice home. You can see the simpler siding, too, right? The wooden clapboard siding. This is an early shot before the library is added on. Now we have quite a lengthy room coming off this side of the house. So, early on, just to give you a flavor of what Samuel Clemens was coming to see. And the children, of course, 3 little girls eventually joined the family, and they absolutely love to come to Quarry Farm in the summers with their mom and dad. And some of these excerpts are now reminiscences by the Clemens' middle daughter. She says, Susie, that's the oldest daughter, and I slept together. My younger sister, Jean, roomed with the nurse, and father and mother occupied a 3rd room. And once again, there's a view of the house and the circular drive in the front, right? And now we'll have a series of pictures that show the upstairs of the house, and in your imagination you can trying to figure out where the girls slept. That's kind of an unusual little bathtub situation up there. You gotta watch your head. This is the bedroom for Susan and Theodore Crane. Some nice cabinetry, probably after the style of Catherine Beecher's American Women's Home. And nice windows. Nice little fireplace in the room, which was pretty essential back in those days, right? This is the tile that is in that fireplace, and they're cranes, interestingly enough. Maybe chosen for their name. Again, you can see some of the angles. When scholars stay here to do their writing and research, pretty frequently that's the bedroom that they choose to use. It's got a nice view of the Chemung River out the window. And of course, back in the day, when Susan and Theodore would wake up, they would see a lot more of that river because of lack of trees. A dairy farming community at that point, so far less vegetation and trees. So they would see much more of the river. This is the room where Samuel and Olivia would have slept. This is not original furnishings. These come in over the years, but it gives you a flavor of the room. Olivia writes a nice letter complimenting Susan on the addition of the hearth and the fireplace. She's glad to have that on chilly mornings. And out of the window in the Clemens' bedroom, this would be where the study would have set. So he could look out his window and see it there on the hillside. It would be on the west side of the house. And that's again a little fireplace, and appropriately we've got a photograph of the study on the mantelpiece there. So if scholars choose to stay in that bedroom, they've got that sense of its past. And that's the kind of window door that's in that bedroom. And you can see the roof of the porch, and it would also offer a nice view in the distance of the river for Clemens. Now this is an additional bedroom up there. So again, in your imagination, you can wonder who was in there. Maybe the maid, maybe the two daughters together. There's a water closet, this one with a sink, right? And you can see the kind of curious angle on the door. All of these plumbing apparatus still work. Another bedroom with a sink, nice and handy. The house had a nice heating system even back in the day. Now, of course, it's steam heat. You can see the way one bedroom kind of flows into the next, which was probably kind of cozy for the family to be together like that. The house in which my aunt lived was simple but very comfortable, with enough rooms to accommodate our family. And I think those photos kind of sum it up. Not quite the manicured lawn that we see today. Much more. And over here, here's another one of the outbuildings on the property. That was the wellhead, the freshwater wellhead for the house, and it's a hexagonal shape, not an octagon. And Susan loved to have outdoor buildings on the property to enjoy the outdoors. This is kind of lengthy, and I don't know that I should read it, but it comes from the New York Times, and it is a correspondent who makes his way here and describes the house. I guess I'll try and give it a quick read. The house, an elegantly built and furnished structure, has an abundance of windows and glass doors on the outside, so that from within, the lovely scenery in the valley below is plainly visible. An arched carriageway connects with the veranda, and the whole is protected from glare and heat by vines and awnings, so as not to obstruct the view. In front of the house and beyond, in place of the pretty lawn, is a huge field of oats, which completely shrouds the brow of the hill, and with its undulating surface softens and disguises any abruptness or roughness which there might otherwise be in the foreground. You can see a little bit of landscaping attitudes in that passage. And again, there's a fairly early view of the house. Still that original footprint, but not quite as grand as we have today. This is 1905, so much later. But you can see again that the front yard is a little less manicured than we have it today. Again, from that New York Times article, the house throughout is furnished in an elegant and costly manner. Divans, Persian rugs, easy chairs, books, statuary, articles of virtu, and bric-a-brac are on every side, and the whole has the appearance of a place where one could dream his life away. So now we'll go in the front door and see what we've got there. That's the staircase that was added later, and there's a nice letter where Samuel Clemens talks about this staircase and the book nook under the steps, that it's a nice use of space. That's the front hallway as you enter the house, and we might choose to go up those stairs, the newel post and some of the woodworking. Very nicely done. This is entering the front parlor. A room that's pretty much as it was when Sam and Livy and the girls were there with Aunt Susan and Uncle Theodore. The furnishings have changed. Of course, over the years the Langdon family refurnished things. But that beautiful chestnut ceiling is there as it was. The windows, just as was described in the New York Times article. This chair, a chair that Samuel Clemens did some writing in. The beautiful pocket window that Susan Crane installed in the house. The whole window and the wood frame slides into the pocket. That's behind that desk. I don't know if I'm making that clear enough, but it was a really nice innovation on her part to not only have that window, but have it nice and neatly slide into the pocket next to it. And of course that allowed for them to bring their furnishings and their rugs out onto that front porch. And the porch truly was another room of the house in the summertime, and a very important room. And there's a view out the window again. And again, just more. Now there is the front parlor in the 1880s, and you can see the kinds of furnishings that were there. And but you can still see pretty fundamentally that it's the same place, the same room. There's been a big change in the mantelpiece, right? Much more elaborate mantelpiece, and all of that's gone now. And I don't really know why. No one's really been able to tell me. And that sure was a loss. And the tiles around the fireplace were chosen by Susan Crane. They depict Aesop's fables. And we know that Samuel Clemens had a nice habit after the family had gathered on the front porch on the summer evenings. He would invite his girls in and for bedtime stories. And each night a different girl would get to choose a different tile as the launching point for the bedtime story. And he had a similar habit in Hartford, Connecticut for bedtime stories with his girls. And Susan Crane kept up the habit even after Samuel Clemens predeceased her in 1910. The books, the book nooks, the bookcases, of course, were all part of the original house. Susan and Theodore were very well-read, kind of erudite people, and it was a wonderful atmosphere for Samuel Clemens to be in. And he and Theodore would do companion reading. They would read the same book and talk back and forth about the books. This is the library. Now this was added on after Samuel Clemens died in 1910, so he never would have seen that room. But it's a beautiful room. The wood is imported from the Philippines, so this would be Jervis Langdon II who adds this room on. And it's, like we say, a pretty grand room. That was one of Samuel Clemens' favorite smoking chairs. And sometimes I think when it's a little humid out and you stand over there, you can get a whiff of cigar smoke coming off of it. It's a beautiful marble fireplace, beautiful trim, mahogany, and so many books. The books in this library, of course, come from several places, in part from the house here at Quarry Farm, but also from the Langdon mansion that was torn down, and also from Ida Langdon's home. She was a daughter of Charlie Langdon, the young man on the Quaker City steamer. She became a professor at Elmira College, and her books partly fill the house too. That's the dining room, of course. That's pretty easy to figure out. And that's not the table and chairs that were here when Sam and Livy and the girls spent summers here. This is 1925 set, but it certainly gives you a flavor of the room. And this window here also that you see from the outside on the front porch is also a pocket window. This has a little handle over here. It slides over to the pocket. to the right. So again, it's a pretty nice use of space on Susan Crane's part. And she set the window low. If you were standing in that room, you'd feel like it was a little bit low. But she set it so that when you were seated at the dining room chair, you were perfectly situated to look out the window and see the beautiful view below. She put that kind of diagonal window in the corner of the house, which is kind of a neat thing. And that little window there, she added, she said she was trying to get different attitudes of light and shadow into the room, and it really does a pretty beautiful job. In the afternoon, sun comes in that room. So Susan Crane is a pretty amazing person, you know. She had a lot of gifts. Would come through what was then a kitchen in the early footprint of the house, and then became a pantry as things were extended. And there we have the kitchen as it looks today. And of course, people always joke that that's Mark Twain's microwave. I just can't not do that. It's probably in bad taste. When scholars stay at the farm, you know, they'll have breakfast in that room and kind of know that this is the place where Samuel Clemens was fond of having his hearty breakfast of steak and eggs. He would have that with Mary Ann Cord, the African-American cook at Quarry Farm, and John T. Lewis, another African-American man who lived up the street. He had a pig farm. And something to think about, Samuel Clemens having breakfast every morning with these two wonderful black people. He liked to get them arguing, principally on topics of politics or religion. One was a Presbyterian, one was a Dunkard, so there was ample things to argue over. And when he got them arguing well enough, he said he liked to exit out the back door, where he would listen to what he had created. There's Mary Ann Cord's stove, still in the house today. She was a mighty fine cook. We read about her fine culinary fare in both the letters of Sam and Livy. So that's a nicely designed stove. Olivia was involved in the design of it, and it's a little bit low. If you were standing there, you'd say, my goodness, that's kind of low. But she did that intentionally. She felt that the cook would be dealing with a lot of very big, heavy pots of water, and often they'd be very hot. And to have it low was a little bit more merciful on the cook's back. Because of course you also had to heat the bath water there and carry it over to the first floor bathtub. Just some of the little detail on the our favorite. More from Clara. She says, on a sunny day one could see the Chemung River sparkling far below as it wound its way through the town of Elmira, nestled cozily between the hills surrounding it. I'm just thinking of our flood lately. Here's a view from Quarry Farm about 1885. So I hope you can see that we've got a lot less trees. We still have some, but we've got a far more sweeping view of the Chemung River. And there, of course, is our view today, where we just kind of have the left side of the photo taken up with the river. But still a really beautiful view. The distant blue hills. This is the pond that was below the property. And some of you who have wandered around to the front of the house have seen this pond, which originally was at the back of the house, and this is where we've all tried to park our cars tonight. Used in a different way back in the 1880s and 1890s. A lot of flower gardens and vegetable gardens back there. Susan Crane was an avid gardener and supplied the park church with its flowers every Sunday. That's highlighting the pot, which is now at the front of the property. Mrs. Crane often referred to her home as "do as you please home," for she wished everyone to feel complete liberty to act and think as he would. And I always think there's Jean, doing as she pleases, standing up on the roof. And here's Osmond or Bruce, I don't know which, getting ready to do as he pleases, jumping out the window. And this is a nice photo. It gives you a sense of that front porch as another room of the house. You've got the nice rugs and nice chairs, and hopefully you can see the shades here, or the blinds, that she would lower to protect the house, if it, the front porch, if it did get a little bit too rainy or windy or buggy, whatever it might be. But on summer evenings, that's where the family gathered for readings. Whatever Samuel Clemens had produced in the study that day, habitually he would read to a ready audience on that front porch. He seemed to be a writer who really valued quick feedback from people he loved and respected. There's another nice view. This is 1895, before Sam and Libby and Clara leave on the Around the World tour. Clemens saying in an interview that appeared in the Chicago Tribune, "No, I am not at work in Elmira, not doing a single thing, just loafing. That's all." This was another outbuilding set a little bit above the study and called the hexagonal tent. And again, you can see these canvas sides that would be dropped down. Sometimes the family even slept up here on really hot, hot nights, because a little bit higher up, they get a little bit more of a breeze. But on Sunday afternoons, as this quote says, this is a superb Sunday. The Cranes are reading and loafing in the canvas-curtained summer house, 50 yards away on the highest point. And there they are. This is Susan Crane now, much later in life, and Ben and Mrs. Pond. And this is one of our last photos of Susie Clemens. And there, of course, is Osmond or Bruce. The cats are loafing over at Ellerslie, which is the children's estate and dwelling house, in their own private grounds, by deed from Susie Crane, 100 yards from the study, among the clover and young oaks and willows. This is Clemens describing this kind of wonderful little building that Susan builds for her nieces to enjoy Ellerslie. And of course, it's close to the study, so Clemens can look down and see his little girls in their playhouse. There was a small rise of ground at the summit of the main hill, stretching off to one side like an extra branch to a tree. Halfway up this elevation stood the little octagonal cottage in which Father did all his writing. And there, of course, is the study as it first appeared in 1874, with its 2 chimneys, right? Now we only have one today, but she even had a window in this face of the little building, so he really could see out of every face of the octagon. One reached it by a winding path and about 20 stone steps. And there's a photograph of Samuel Clemens on them in 1903, much later. It was a charming sort of Peter Pan house, covered with ivy and surrounded by beautiful wildflowers and morning glories. He had a nice commute to work. That's again the 1903 visit, so much later. In spite of the 8 good-sized windows, the air was so permeated with tobacco smoke that it was almost stifling to one unused to it. That one looks like that one. That's right. Father seemed to thrive on it, notwithstanding, and in fact, the less he followed the good advice of physicians, the better he seemed to feel. This is another arbor. That was another outbuilding of the property. No exercise, little fresh air, constant inhaling of cigar smoke, all contributed to keep him in good health. Clara's got a bit of Father's humor too. Now again, I apologize for this length, but I'll try to read it quickly. The visitor finds the humorous study higher up the hill in the rear of the house and screened by vines and evergreens. It is a small octagonal building containing but a single room. Here the humorist does the greater portion of his summer's work, and here for 8 summers Mark Twain has worked industriously, for, notwithstanding the fact that he has been called indolent, he is a most indefatigable worker. To keep way the large number of sightseers who come up the big hill to his sanctum, Twain has posted on the door the following novel sign: "Step softly, keep away, do not disturb the remains." In spite of this characteristic warning, we open the door and floor is bare and has across one corner some pages of a manuscript and scraps of newspaper articles pinned to it to prevent dispersion by the wind. There is a table in the center of the room covered with books, pamphlets, newspapers, manuscripts, and all the paraphernalia of authorship. On one side is a comfortable-looking lounge, somewhat soiled by use, and over the fireplace is a shelf on which rests a few books and a couple of boxes of choice cigars. That is all, except a pervasive odor of smoke. And of course, here's Mary Ann Cord. She's our African-American cook at Quarry Farm, who cooked at the Our Favorite stove. And there it is. And this is a nice shot because it shows the study up on the hillside. And this is the arch of the front porch as we still see it today. And of course the wooden porch has not been extended yet, so they're actually kind of sitting in the grassy area where the carriages pull in. And this is Susie, she's 2 years old, and here's Susan Crane and Theodore, and there's Libby, and little Clara on her lap. So that was a habitual place for the family to gather even before the porch was extended. And this, of course, is a sample of the manuscript and the size paper that he wrote on when he was here, hardly 8.5 by 11, right? Handwritten. This is from a true story, which is the story of the cook at Quarry Farm. I think I have a few pages of that here, not too much, because it does so use the front porch in its narrative. He begins it by saying it was summertime and twilight. We were sitting on the porch of the farmhouse on the summit of the hill, and Aunt Rachel, who was Mary Ann Cord, the cook, was sitting respectfully below our level on the steps, for she was our servant and colored. She was of mighty frame and stature. Aunt Rachel had gradually risen while she warmed to her subject, and now she towered above us, black against the stars. So as the evening progresses, Aunt Rachel, or Mary Ann Cord, begins to tell Samuel Clemens the story of her life. She says, they put chains on us and put us on a stand, as high as this porch. So the actual porch at Quarry Farm, 20 foot high. And all the people stood around, crowds and crowds. And they come up there and look at us all round and squeeze our arm and make us get up and walk and then say, this one too old, or this one lame, or this one don't amount to much. And they sold my old man and took him away, and they begin to sell my children and take them away, and I begin to cry. So once again, that's kind of the porch and the scene where this story has its birth. And the man say, shut up your damn blubber, and hit me on the mouth with his hand. And when the last one was gone, but my little Henry, I grabbed him close up to my breast so, and I rise up and says, you shan't take him away, I says. I'll kill the man that touches him, I says. But my little Henry whisper and say, I want to run away, and then I'll work and buy your freedom. Oh, bless the child. He always so good. But they got him, the men did. But I took and tear the clothes most off of him and beat him over the head with my chain. And they give it to me too, but I didn't mind that. Well, there was my old man gone, and all my children, all my 7 children. And 6 of them I ain't set eyes on again to this day, and that's 22 years ago last Easter. Well, Clemens is mightily moved by Mary Ann Cord's story and her eventual reunion with that son, Henry. And it's one of the first pieces that he composes in the little writing building that his sister-in-law gives to him. Again, that's a photograph from the 1874 year. And there's a nice interior shot from 1874, and you can see the New York Times articles kind of accurate, describing what the place looks like. And he's at work. And eventually that story of Mary Ann Cord makes its way into the Atlantic Monthly. It's Samuel Clemens' breakthrough story. Really changes the shape of his career and establishes him as a more serious author. And breaks him into the world of vernacular speech. pretty important story that found its origins on the front porch at Quarry Farm. And the building, the building that we now kind of use as the restroom building was Mary Ann Cord's home or cottage. So she had a pretty nice situation. She was very beloved by Susan and Theodore. And that would have been the door that she would have exited from the main house, kind of the cook's door. It's still there today. If you walk around the back of the house, you'll see it. And an easy commute to her home. And that's, of course, as it looks today, on kind of a misty October day. And she's buried. This also was Tim's handiwork, finding her stone. She did marry again. Washington was her last name. And she's buried in the Woodlawn Cemetery also. So what did Samuel Clemens write at Quarry Farm? I mean, I'm sure you all well know. He wrote Roughing It. That was his first major piece. He wrote that inside the house in 1871. And then Tom Sawyer followed, published in 1876, I believe, if I'm thinking clearly. Then Huckleberry Finn starts right after that. But Huckleberry Finn is composed over a long period of time, 8 years. You know, he has some fitful stops and starts to it as he's thinking the plot through. And as he's working on that, he does The Prince and the Pauper here at Quarry Farm, and dedicates that to his two oldest daughters. And these are some comments by Clara about that. She says, "The long day of writing usually had been uninterrupted, but when Mark Twain was at work on The Prince and the Pauper," actually I think this is Ida Langdon saying this, when Mark Twain was at work on The Prince and the Pauper, there were frequent gatherings on the study steps that did perhaps amount to interruptions, but welcome ones. The children, sometimes accompanied by their cousins or friends from the town, by pre-arrangement with their father, would come trooping silently in the quiet zone maintained around the little octagon late in the afternoon. And there's his little girls about that time. If he were ready for them, he would call out. Sometimes they were not just on the spot, and he blew a horn for them. And in breathless excitement, they would gather around him to hear the newest chapter of this story they passionately loved. A Tramp Abroad, which is the story of his travels on foot across the continent, was written here at Quarry Farm. He kept notebooks from that trip and then put the book together here, the manuscript. Life on the Mississippi, it's always kind of fun to think about, was written in Elmira, New York, overlooking the Chemung River. But when you visit Hannibal, Missouri, and go up Cardiff Hill, and you see the remarkable similarity between just the terrain and the foliage and the river that he knew as a young man, and then sit here at Quarry Farm and see the same kind of scene, it's pretty clear why this place inspired his remembrance of his boyhood. And Huckleberry Finn, of course, was eventually published. And the last one, long piece, was a Yankee, or a Connecticut Yankee, in King Arthur's Court. And the publisher had trouble getting Connecticut on the front cover, so that's a really nice edition if you find that one. Buy it. He loved the company of cats when he was writing, and here he's sitting with a porcelain cat for this coverage by a magazine article. No trouble with a porcelain cat. Papa is very fond of animals, particularly of cats. We had a dear little gray kitten once that he named Lazy. Papa always wears gray to match his hair and eyes. And he would carry him around on his shoulder. It was a mighty pretty sight. The gray cat sound asleep against Papa's gray coat and hair. That's his daughter writing about her father. And there's Cats at Quarry Farm, kind of famous photograph that was taken here. And there's where they lived year-round. That's their home in Hartford, Connecticut. I just thought we should have that in here so you understand that that's the place they were leaving in the 20 summers that they would come here. Very beautiful home, designed in large part by Olivia. But they were glad to get away in the summer vacation in Elmira, come home to Olivia's hometown, and to Quarry Farm, to Aunt Susan and Uncle Theodore. For I can write 10 chapters in Elmira, where I can write 1 here, meaning 1 in Hartford, 10 in Elmira. For when one is in the workaday world, there's a million interruptions and interferences. I can't succeed except by getting clear out of the world on top of the mountain at Elmira. And there's our statue on the Elmira College campus. And of course he dies in 1910, and the house, goes through a couple of changes and iterations as the years go on. Here it is in 1912. Here it is in 1960. And then, of course, by 1982, Jervis and Irene Langdon make the decision to give the house to the college in January of 1982, and kind of set up the idea that this will be the centerpiece for a center devoted to the study of Mark Twain's life and literature. And they make an agreement that the college won't have it open to the public. It won't be a museum. No admission fees. No commercial activities. Carefully maintain the house and the grounds as they are, keep them natural, and use it as a residence for Mark Twain scholars to come to do their writing and thinking in much the same way that Samuel Clemens used it in his life. And a lot of people react different ways to that plan. I think it's pretty brilliant use for an old home, and has really contributed mightily to scholarship in the Mark Twain world. I haven't done a count recently of how many books have been published by the scholars who have had the privilege of staying there, but it's more than 56. That much I know, and lots of short pieces written there, and just, if you've attended the lectures, an incredible affection that all of these scholars have for the privilege of staying in that house and writing there. And there, of course, is Quarry Farm as it looks today in the autumn. A bit different from all those early black and whites. And that is the end. Well, the trouble began at 8 and ends at 9. It's 9. If you have any questions, you can come up afterward. It might be very hot out there, I have no idea, but remember to drive carefully and patiently as you all make your way out of here. And next week, another kind of nice local focus will be as we look at Roughing It, which of course was written here at Quarry Farm. So come back if you'd like. Thank you for coming tonight.